My name is Christina Hildebrand. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and president of A Voice for Choice Advocacy. We educate and advocate for informed choice and transparency of what goes into your body, be it food, air, water, pharmaceuticals, you name it. We want you to know what's in the products you put into your body and have you make an informed decision on that. I am going to be answering questions tonight, and I will try and get through all the questions that we have. I do ask you to put them in the Q&A section. And I will just go through them one by one in the order that I see them. I don't know if that's the order you see them, but let's get started. So first question, at this point, does K through 12 school have to accept a personal belief exemption for a student? What does the personal exemption entail, look like? Will there be one universal form for California, or will each school district have its own? So a lot of those questions are unanswered. So for the most part, most school districts, most public school districts have not yet implemented a COVID vaccine mandate. There are a few, San Diego Unified, LA Unified, Culver City, Piedmont, Oakland, Sacramento, West Contra Costa. I feel like there's one more that have put in vaccine mandates for COVID for 7th grade and above right now. And those schools, those school districts, some of them have a personal belief exemption, some of them have a religious exemption, and some of them only have a medical exemption. Some of them are accepting those exemptions and the child can go to school without anything else, just like medical exemptions have been over the years. Other ones like LAUSD are saying if you're not vaccinated, it doesn't matter what exemption you have. They're not actually allowing any exemptions, but even if you have a medical exemption, that you have to go to, if you want to be public school educated, you have to go to City of Angels, which is their virtual school. And so we're seeing different ways of this being implemented. There are lawsuits against San Diego Unified and LAUSD, and we expect to see more in the different school districts that have mandated it coming shortly. So what does the personal belief exemption look like? So if your school has not, and I'm talking public school, I'll get into private school a little, well, actually private schools, most private schools also haven't implemented a vaccine mandate, but they fall under the same type of criteria if they have. Some of them allow personal belief exemptions, some of them allow religious exemptions, some of them don't allow any exemptions. And at that point, you are asked to leave the school, basically. Most of them, if they're pushed, they'll allow a religious exemption. As for what the personal belief exemption is going to look like, we don't really know. When this is rolled out, so the Governor Newsom has said that he is going to request Cdph, the California Public Health Department, to put out regulations, which they are allowed to do per the statute, to put out regulations that mandates the COVID vaccine for 7th to 12th graders and for K to 6th graders. And that will happen when the FDA approves the vaccine for 12+-year-olds and for 5+-year-olds. We anticipate that the FDA will fully approve them for 12+-year-olds, probably January, February next year. And what Newsom has said is the implementation of the vaccine mandate will go into place the semester after that. So for July, if you do summer school, or September, if you don't do summer school. My anticipation is that the 5th through 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds will be fully approved in probably the summer. And so by September of 2022, all schools will be required to mandate the COVID vaccine, but a personal belief exemption will be in place. You can use that personal belief exemption. Our anticipation is that that personal belief exemption will be a form that you have to get filled out, similar to the personal belief exemption prior to 2015. But we really have no idea how they're going to implement it and how they're going to enforce it. It may be that people write their own personal belief exemption, but my guess is that it will be a form that is from California and not from the school district. There's one other thing that I was going to say. The other piece is that we are anticipating in January 2022 or February 2022 that there will be legislatures that introduce a bill that removes the personal belief exemption for the COVID vaccine and possibly removes the personal belief exemption for any future vaccines that would allow Cdph, the California Department of Public Health, to just implement new vaccines on a schedule, which is extremely concerning for things like HPV and the flu vaccine and any future pandemic vaccines. And so if that gets passed, if the COVID vaccine without a personal belief exemption gets passed, then it would go into effect likely January 2023, possibly July 2023. But it will go, the law will go into effect January 2023. It's whether they implement it either that school year or the following school year. My guess is that they will implement it in January because most people will have had to be vaccinated with a personal belief exemption. So they're just targeting kids on a personal belief exemption. Hopefully that answers that question. Okay, next question. Has the bill to include a COVID vax for school already been proposed? What is the possibility of kids being able to be grandfathered if they have an existing medical exemption and are in high school? So the bill has not yet been introduced. So bills get introduced in January and February. Some can be introduced in December, but usually they're introduced in January, February. So we won't see the language until then. We do know that Senator Pan, Senator Wicks, Senator Wiener, Assemblymember Wicks, Senator Wiener, and Assemblymember Weber and Lowe have been in conversations, possibly with more people, but they have been in conversations about this legislation. I think it was Senator Pan that said that on one of his press conversations. As for a medical exemption being grandfathered in, I don't have hope for it, honestly. I think it would come down to someone like the governor putting their foot down. So the only reason that the medical exemption was grandfathered in for SB 276 in 2019 was because of the governor coming down and saying they have to be grandfathered in. So if the governor were willing to do that again, then yes, possibly. I don't think Senator Pan or any of the other legislatures that are on that level would want it to be grandfathered. And I also think they would say something like, well, it has to include the COVID vaccine in the actual written piece of the medical exemption. And none of us, when we had our medical exemptions grandfathered in, we may have put something like all other vaccines, but it wouldn't have had the COVID vaccine in there specifically. So my guess is that they wouldn't be grandfathered in. I really do feel for everyone who's in that situation or is in a situation that doesn't want to vaccinate your kids. But my response is you really need to work out a plan for what happens if your child has to be vaccinated in January 2023. And do you move out of state? Do you vaccinate? Do you homeschool? What do you do? So on to the next question. How do I write a personal belief exemption as compared to a religious exemption? Is there a difference? So yes, there is a difference. So religious exemptions fall under personal belief exemptions. The personal belief exemptions are a much broader reason for not having a vaccine. You can just say it's against my personal beliefs for whatever reasons, whether they're scientific, whether they're religious, whether you just don't want this vaccine. That's a personal belief exemption. It's that you just saying, I don't want the vaccine. You don't have to have a reason. You can have a reason. It can be any reason you want. For a religious exemption, you have to have religious beliefs. You have to have a belief in a higher power. It doesn't need to be a supreme being. So it doesn't need to be God, Allah, Jesus, those types, but you do have to have a belief in a higher power, and you have to have a religious foundation that you live by. It doesn't have to be part of an organized religion here in the US. If you want more information on how to write a religious exemption, go to our religious exemption workshop. I'm not going to get into those details here. But if you want to write a personal belief exemption, as I said, it may be a form, but if you were to write your own personal belief exemption, it literally would just say, vaccines are against my personal beliefs. I do not wish to have my child vaccinated for this vaccine. Okay, next question. Can private religious schools opt out of these mandates? So legally, they cannot. They are considered private schools. They are considered part of the sort of swath of what is covered by this. Having said that, I do know there are some religious schools that have chosen to opt out, and it will be interesting to see if if someone comes after them. I will say that if your children go to a religious school, we are a Voice for Choice Advocacy and CHCA, which is California Health Advocacy Coalition, and Educate Advocate are working together to get religious schools and religious leaders on board to having a religious exemption. We do see the religious exemption or a conscious exemption, which falls underneath the religious exemption, as an option to possibly getting an exemption for the COVID vaccine. But it's going to be extremely hard to get that. Okay, next question. What is shedding? How long does it last? How does it affect unvaccinated person? Does government acknowledge shedding as a real thing? Thinking about how my child would be in a classroom 5 days a week, and if half the class is vaccinated within a few weeks, that is a large shedding exposure for him. Should I be worried? What can I do to mitigate possible negative effects? Great question. So what is shedding? Shedding traditionally has happened with things like the MMR vaccine or the live polio vaccine. So those are live vaccines that include the live virus in the vaccine. And so somebody who takes those vaccines for a period after you've gotten those vaccines, you can develop the symptoms and you can actually have it in your system, and you can spread it to someone else. So for example, if you have the MMR, there are some people that get measles or just have it's such a viral load of measles. They may not have open, spots from measles. They can do, but they may not have open spots from measles, but they do spread the virus. It usually lasts somewhere between, the first 2 weeks after vaccination are the highest load. And then after that, it sort of tapers off. Traditionally, for example, if you are a chemo patient or oncology patient, and they say that neither you nor anyone in your family that's living with you should get live vaccines while they're undergoing chemotherapy. And so, that just tells you that it is real. It is recognized by the CDC. It is acknowledged by the government for things like measles, measles, mumps, rubella, the live vaccines. It is not recognized for the COVID vaccines. And I think part of that is that it is just too soon to know. And also, I think some of it is being studied, but I don't think it is being studied in great effect. And I don't think we'll see, if it comes out, I don't see it, that we'll see it for many, many years. As for your child who's in a classroom 5 days a week, I think my advice, and my younger daughter, actually both of my daughters went through this, they're in middle school and high school. I think the question for you is, what would be more detrimental for your child? To be in the classroom with those vaccinated children and to bolster their immune system and to be happy and not concerned about it and sharing that worry with your child, or pulling your child out of school. So for me, my children, it would have been much more negative for me to pull my children out. I personally couldn't because of my ex, but it would have, the disruption of being pulled out of school for something it would be huge. And so for me, it was really a matter of, I need to get my head around. I think so much of this, I'm a big believer in energy though, and that other people's energy affects you. And so if you can send your child in with give them supplements. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not advising anything from a medical perspective, but, give them supplements that boost their immune system so that their immune system can be, a shield for them. But I would not just look at the physical effects. I would look at the emotional effects. And I'm a strong believer that the COVID lockdowns and schools closing and everything else has had a much higher effect on mental health than it has on physical health. Again, just my personal opinion there. Is there any states that still accept personal exemptions for all childhood vaccines? Which are they? Yes. So most states accept either a personal belief exemption or a religious belief exemption. There are only 6 states that only have a medical exemption. And those 6 states are California, New York, Connecticut, Maine, West Virginia, and Mississippi. So those states only have a medical exemption. They do not have a personal belief or a religious exemption. So any other state you pick will have one of 2. If you want to see which states have religious exemptions, which have personal belief exemptions, I would go to the National Vaccine Information Center, NVIC, and they have a map of it that shows that. Can an employer ask if you are vaccinated before making you an offer? They can. So that can be part of their hiring requirement. They are not supposed to discriminate against you, especially if you have religious beliefs. So if your employer is saying, are you vaccinated? You can either say, I decline to state that, or you can say, I'm not vaccinated for religious reasons or for medical reasons, but you have to be able to back that up. The tough thing with a hiring process is that if you are one of many, many candidates, you will never know that you were not chosen because you weren't vaccinated. Should they ask it? No, they shouldn't. But we live in a day and age today that this doesn't seem to be something that is off limits anymore. Okay. When the vax becomes mandatory for schools in California, what is the step to prepare? Both my boys have MEs from a doctor on the list, and both have IEPs, but this is COVID, so not on the list of vaccinations. So if your child has, I went through the first piece of this, but if your child has an IEP, we anticipate that your child will be able to continue as they can without being vaccinated for all the childhood vaccinations in California schools in person. My recommendation, if you have any issues with special needs or IEPs, is to go to an organization called Educate Advocate. Their website is educateadvocateca.com. It's not .com, it's .org, but I'm pretty sure it's .com. And they are an amazing organization that we work very closely with, and they support parents of children with special needs, and they have a breadth of information and knowledge on that topic. Hello, my daughter has a 504, not an IEP. Can she get an exemption based on just that? No, 504s are not covered. It's only IEPs that are covered under the statute, which exempts them from having to do all the vaccinations. And I should just preface this with what I'm talking about is California primarily here. So if you're in a different state, different things apply. Okay, next question. In your opinion, what is the best way to stand up for our freedom rights now? Pull money out of big banks, Cash Friday, post ban contacts on social media. Should we put our time, energy, and money to stand for freedom? Good question. So I am a big believer that your money is where you put your money is really where you speak from. And the more people that speak from their money perspective, the more it will have an impact. The unfortunate thing is, for example, if you live in San Francisco, where 90% of the people are vaccinated anyway, saying I'm not going to go to the restaurants that require me to be vaccinated to go inside doesn't really have a huge impact. So it's really pulling money. I definitely am a big proponent of pulling money out of big banks. If you have IRAs at Vanguard, what are they called? What are the other ones called? Blackrock, Vanguard, Fidelity, any of those big banks, I would definitely pull it out. I think using cash is a great idea, but I think really making it known why you're doing it. So not only just doing it, but saying, things like, I am going to be shopping here instead of Amazon, or here instead of, something, Whole Foods, or wherever it is that you're pulling out of, and making a statement by doing it rather than just pulling stuff out. I will say this week, I am about probably now 10 years ago, I invested in a winery. A friend put together great wine. They're a very, very small company. They have a tasting room in Jack London Square in Oakland. And I was on their board of directors, and they sent out an email on Friday last week saying that they were only having vaccinated people in their wine tasting. It was not put down by Oakland or any other entity. They just chose to do that. And I resigned as a director and pulled my money out. So it makes a difference. It makes a difference when you talk with your money. So, it wasn't something that I wanted to be a part of anymore. Okay. Do you think the president is going to get his way with the federal mandate? I think there are going to be a lot of lawsuits. I think for federal employers and contractors, I do think he will, and they have a religious exemption, so and a medical exemption, and I do think they will. I think for the employers of 100 or more employees, I think that is, it's already got lawsuits against it. It's also already been stayed. So I think that one has less of a chance of succeeding. We'll have to see what happens. I think it's interesting that states like Florida just mentioned today that they wanted to pull out of OSHA and didn't want to be part of OSHA anymore, which I think is great. A great way of, again, they're voting with their money, they're voting with their say. So yeah. Where are we on a vaccine mandate to fly in airplanes? Do you think this is coming? Have we seen the worst of the mandates already, or do you think there are more restrictions and mandates still to come? So I think on flying, I don't see it happening. I really don't. I think there is a bill in Congress. I think it is the House of Representatives. I don't remember which one, but there is a bill that says that in order to fly in planes, you have to be vaccinated. I think if that happens, number one, we've already seen the so-called sick outs for airlines, and airlines pulling back on their staff having to be vaccinated. So I don't think it will happen in the US. I think there will be places that you come to that you may have to be vaccinated. So for example, you come into the United States, if you're not a US citizen, you can't arrive without being vaccinated. And similarly, if you go to places in Europe, you have to be vaccinated, some places. So I think those types of things, I don't know that they would be able to do that on a state by state basis. So for example, if California said, if you're going to fly into California, you have to have the vaccine. I don't know if the states could do that. So I think that one will be heavily litigated if it happens. Do I think we've seen the worst of it? I don't think we've seen the worst of it in California. I think it will get a lot worse as numbers go up, COVID cases go up over the winter. And I think there will be legislation next year. So I think we will have childhood vaccines. I think we'll see the two bills that were not introduced, but were sort of leaked and proposed, which were, one of them was that employees have to mandate the vaccine. I think the OSHA regulations, I think that California will codify those. So even if OSHA isn't successful in putting forward that, I think California will codify it and make it have to be implemented in California. I also think we will see more societal mandates. I think we will see what's happening in LA, what's happening in San Francisco, where you can't go in certain places if you're not vaccinated. I don't know that that will be done on a state level, but I definitely think it will be done on a city level more and more. And so in California, do I think we're out of it? Absolutely not. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I honestly don't know how much better it's ever going to get, because many of the people that don't want to put up with this are leaving. And those would be the people that would be voting against these mandates. So unfortunately, California is becoming more and more progressive liberal, because the non-progressive liberal, the people that don't want to put up with this, are moving to other states. Next question. My school district has put us out on unpaid leave as of November 1st. Can I apply for unemployment? You cannot apply for unemployment if you're on unpaid leave of absence. You have to be fired. And that is the ploy for these employers who are putting people, basically the religious exemptions are getting accepted most, and I believe you're probably in this situation. Your religious belief exemption is getting accepted, but then you're being put on an unpaid leave of absence. If you're on unpaid leave of absence, you're still employed by that employer, so you can't file for unemployment. The only time you can file for unemployment is they fire you, and they are not willing to do that. Having said that, when you're on an unpaid leave of absence, you can be hired by someone else. So you can work for someone else while you're on an unpaid leave of absence. The unpaid leave of absence, what it does is it allows you, if ever they change the policy, or you can go in with other restrictions. So for example, with masks and testing instead, that you go back at the same level that you left at. So you keep your seniority, and you keep your vacation days and your sick days and your benefits usually. So, but you can work for someone else. You can't get unemployment though. What recourse do we have against businesses in LA that deny us access with exemptions and testing? I am seeing this all over, even LA Parks and Rec saying no indoor sports without the shot. Yes, I have seen that as well. I think it will come to lawsuits. I think what I would do is I would try showing up with a religious exemption and a negative COVID test and document it. Or first of all, ask them, do you accept religious exemptions? and just do a lot of documentation. I think there will be lawsuits on this, but there needs to be a good case. The other thing is if you can get a lot of people to do the same thing. So what happens if 20 kids show up for an indoor sport with a religious exemption and a negative test? Will they turn them away and document it? I think it's going to take some civil disobedience on this one for it to have any recourse. And I do, as I said, I do think there will be lawsuits. I think it's really a matter of finding the best case for a lawsuit to try and win that. I do think it will be based on discrimination and segregation. Okay, next question. My son is in the 7th grade and his PPE expired. His school nurse is saying he needs to get the hepatitis B series for 8th grade admission. Is this true? I can't find anything in the law. So yes, yes and no. It's a gray area in the law. Hepatitis B is not required for 7th grade. That's specifically stated in the law. But hepatitis B is required as part of the childhood vaccinations for enrollment in school. And so there are some schools that say, okay, you don't need it for 7th grade. We've checked you off. You complied with all the 7th grade stuff. You're good to go. And there are other schools that require, there are other mostly public schools that will, and there are some public schools that are much worse than other schools that do require the hepatitis B. And it is, by law, it is required for enrollment. It's just not required for 7th grade. Okay, next question. The city of and county of San Francisco has denied nearly all religious exemptions, and many employers are looking to sue for discrimination and wrongful termination. Do you have a recommendation for attorneys for such lawsuits? I do. So in order to do that, you have to have, I would have them send me an email, because in order to file a lawsuit, you have to have gone through a process. You have to have appealed, stating what, restating your religious beliefs. The key is, why did they deny your religious belief exemption? And I do believe they're blanket. If you know of anyone that has had their religious belief exemption accepted, I would ask them what they wrote and see what the difference is. Is it the job that they're in? Is it the way they wrote the exemption? Is it something else? Because you want to work out that for a lawsuit, you would need to work out why yours was denied and why theirs was accepted. I haven't heard of anyone have one accepted. So if you know of someone, I'd love to talk to them. And looking to sue, the other thing that you need to do is you need to file complaints with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and CalHR. And there's another one, the DEFH, Department of Employment and Fair Housing. Those three, you need to file complaints and get a response before you can file a lawsuit. As for attorneys, I do have a list of attorneys, and if you need help doing the above, send me an email and put in religious exemption denied in the email content. I am behind in my emails, severely behind in my emails. So I will try, if you put that in the subject line, then I'm more likely to see it and respond. I do have attorneys, but the attorneys that we have are super, super busy on this. And so I can put you in touch with them, but I will let you know that I'm having a hard time getting in touch with them myself. Did the statewide school sit out on 10/18 have any impact? Any idea of the numbers that actually sat out? Is this any use to have a student sit out for such a protest if your school district is set up so that it does not even lose any funding from a school student being absent? So I believe it had an impact from the perspective of the press and the media. I do believe it had an impact in northern, smaller school districts where they actually had to close down the school. It was 70% of the people weren't there, teachers weren't there. I think in places where we would like it to have the biggest impact, such as LAUSD or Sacramento schools, San Diego schools, San Francisco schools, it really didn't have as much of an impact just because there weren't as many people that were sitting out. Is it worth it? I think you have to work that out. That's for you as a family and for your children specifically, as to whether it makes sense for you or not to do it. I do know that there were some children that were they came back to school and the teachers knew that they had been absent for that purpose. And basically we're told, we're not going to share, I'm not going to give you the homework from yesterday. You were absent, you're going to miss it. You're going to get an F for that homework. And so, for those kids, is that sort of harassment, discrimination? Yes, it is. But I personally wouldn't put my kids through it. I don't personally put my kids in the middle of this. So I have a different, I can see the perspective on all sides. And so my answer is you really need to work it out for your family, whether you want to take that stand or whether you don't, whether it makes sense for you. Okay, next question. Do you think that the government care like Medicare or Medi-Cal will be not available in the future for those of us that choose not to get the never-ending shots? I don't think they will. I think they always have to allow you to have coverage, but I think they will make it hard. I think, let me put it this way. Is there a possibility? Yeah, there's a possibility. I mean, if you go down this road on the worst possible tangent, we become a communist state. We become China, where you can't, walk around and you don't get the shot, your social credit score plummets. You now can't go, to the post office. You can't travel on trains. You can't fly. You can't, is that a reality that could happen? 100% yes. And if it's going to happen in some state, it's going to happen in California and New York. I don't think the Medicare, Medi-Cal piece, I don't think it would happen, because I think there are too many. So the Medicare piece is a federal piece, and there are just too many states that wouldn't be okay with that. Although government would not acknowledge vitamins and ivermectin as valid prevention treatment of COVID, with the Merck pill on the horizon, will that change pushing the vax mandates passports? So I think it will. I think we will have one more push for the COVID vaccines this winter, and the boosters specifically. I think the COVID vaccines are very much money oriented, not surprisingly, but I think, and I haven't found, if anyone wants to do this, I would love somebody to do this, but to work out the number of vaccines that have been purchased by the federal government, and specifically then going into California, how many purchased by California. But I believe the number of vaccines that were purchased far exceeds the number of people in the US. And therefore they need to get rid of those because they've already paid for them. They need to get rid of them, and it'll be that number of boosters because they've already paid the pharmaceutical companies. I think once the pharmaceutical companies are no longer subsidized or primarily subsidized by the government, that's when it may change to being more of a it's okay to get treatment. But by then they've vaccinated the large majority of the population. Were you surprised the Newsom recall numbers were so low? I honestly wasn't. I think two things happened with that recall. Number one, we have a huge number of Democrats. We have 70% registered Democrats in this state. So in order for Newsom to be recalled, you either needed Democrats not to show up, or you needed Democrats to be really pissed off with him and have an alternative that they felt safe with. The Newsom campaign, played it politically very, very well. And I think there wasn't a strong enough Republican candidate that was mainstream enough. So Larry Elder definitely came in as the, very, very popular person, very well-known person, but he isn't a person that most Democrats would vote for. And so it sort of diminished that likelihood. I also think that, the Texas abortion ban was perfect timing for Newsom. I mean, he made it all about that and said that, if Larry Elder gets, or any Republican gets in office, that's going to happen in California. There was no way that would happen in California. There isn't, we don't have the legislative, we don't have the Republicans in this state to make that happen on any level, and a governor can't put that in place. So it was a perfect storm. But am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised. I think Newsom has support in this state. And unfortunately, as I said, more and more people that are on the other side of him are leaving the state. Okay, next question. What language do you recommend Or how do you recommend we respond to private businesses, restaurants, theaters, etc., asking for the vaccine papers or a recent test? Just walk away or say something to resist. So I think if you are not planning on getting in, then, so if you don't want to show up with a recent test and get into the establishment, then I would, I would make it known that you are, especially for places that are where you're a long time patron or you've spent a lot of money, I would let them know. I would send them an email. I would send them a letter saying, I used to come here once a week, or however often. I used to come here once a year, and I understand it is, most likely their answer is going to be, well, we're just following the city guidelines. We're just following the rules. And the answer is, yeah, but you can also stand up against those rules. If we lose our job because our religious accommodation is not approved, I assume we cannot have COBRA. Also, are health insurance companies requiring the COVID vax for new applicants? So health insurance companies should not be requiring the COVID vaccine for new applicants. I have not heard that at all. And if you lose your job, can you get COBRA? I am not a job employment lawyer or know any of those details. So I really don't know. I'm not sure whether I have no idea. You would need to talk to your HR about that. Okay. When can we push for natural immunity to be accepted, the same as vaccination? Is there something out there I can join to push for past infection antibodies, natural immunity to COVID to be accepted, the same as proof of vaccination? I think this is a great point. There are two sides to this argument. So I personally think it's a wonderful thing to do. And I do think it amazes me that in the US, if you've had COVID yesterday, and you're required to get the vaccine, it is okay for you to get the vaccine the following day, and your natural immunity isn't taken into consideration. If you look at Europe considers 6 months of natural immunity. I think it is much more than that. We have not been seeing people who have had COVID get reinfected with COVID. There are people who have tested positive more than once, but I've yet to find somebody who has tested positive more than once and has actually had the symptoms of COVID more than once. And I say that because there is a high number of false positives in the test. So, and you may have had COVID and you may have been exposed to someone with COVID. And so your immune system is fighting COVID. But, that's considered natural immunity. And so I do think there is a good argument. I would love for someone, and we don't have the bandwidth with our interns right now, but what I would love to see is a collection, because there are papers, there are articles, journal articles out there that say both things, that say that natural immunity does count. But then there are others, and I do think some of them are flawed research, but there are others that say that, getting one booster shot actually is better, or that natural immunity is waning. But we haven't seen the numbers or the statistics on those. And so I would love for somebody, if you're interested in working on this, the person who asked this question or anyone else, if you're interested in helping a voice for choice advocacy come up with a sort of culmination of all the data around this, both from the US and from the world, on natural immunity, because I think we have to have the science before we push for it. I think there may be an argument for natural immunity that comes out next year sometime, when all the people have been vaccinated, and they say, well, if you've had COVID, you actually have pretty good immunity. We've seen that you have at least a year, 2 years, or when the natural immunity starts waning. So once, it may be that COVID, if you've had it, you can get it again in 2 years time, let's say. And I think once that starts to happen, because then they can push the vaccination. So I think it's hard. There is also an argument, I will say, on the flip side of this, that says that we shouldn't only be pushing for natural immunity, because there are people that are healthy that take vitamins and supplements and that kind of thing, that have not gotten COVID because they live a healthy lifestyle and a safe lifestyle, and they shouldn't be sort of discriminated against because of the life they lead and they haven't gotten COVID. So that's just another flip side of the coin that to take into consideration. How will the mandates in California affect homeschooled children? So I don't think they will affect homeschooled children right now. I don't think, California wants to do away with homeschooling or make homeschooling much harder. So for example, that the teachers have to be, can't be parents, they have to be certified in some way. But I don't think homeschooling will go away completely. I think if anything, it will be made more restrictive as it is in other states. But I don't think the COVID vaccination will be required of homeschool kids. I think they have to have, I think at that point, you don't have any educational options. And so that would be a lawsuit right there. Okay. Is the COVID vaccine mandatory for entering the US if one is a permanent resident? I do not believe so. I think if you are a permanent resident or a citizen, so have a green card, then you are not required to get the COVID vaccine. But I would check twice before you leave and can't come back. Okay, last Q&A in August, you listed some states that might be good to move with less mandates and where freedoms would be more protected. Would South Carolina be one of them? So South Carolina, I agree. I think South Carolina would be one of them, yes. The interesting thing, I had my daughter look into South Carolina, and she likes to do theater. And so we looked at theaters in South Carolina. And what's interesting there is most of the theaters require one to be vaccinated to be on stage. And because they don't have any mandates, they basically are left to their own devices. Now, the governor has said he's coming out with an order that would not allow any mandates, would not allow any requirements. And if that moves forward, then yes. But right now, because there are no requirements, each individual business, it's much more sort of democratic, so to speak, but each individual business can say what they want done. You go to somewhere like North Carolina that has a mask mandate, and that's the only mandate. So for them, everyone, all the theaters there are saying, okay, you have to wear a mask, but then none of them are requiring the vaccine because that's not part of what the state has told them to do. So, I would say if you're looking at different states, look at what you're interested in doing there and how you live. Are you interested in being a city, or on the land? What are you looking for, and does it fit with what you, what your way of life, so to speak? Okay. What is the best way to oppose vax mandates passports? I feel there are a lot of groups opposing out there, but it is fragmented. Which groups should I lend my support to for best info and best opposition efforts? I agree with you, especially in California. So in California, because we are such a large state and we are so diverse and we are so big geographically, there are a lot of groups out there. And unfortunately, many of them don't work together and sort of running with things before they actually running before, without sort of considering other groups or other perspectives. My recommendation is do your research, work out the groups that resonate most with you. So there are groups that are, for example, against all mandates. There are groups that are against the childhood mandates. There are groups that are, against masking, there are groups that are more focused on education. The other thing, A Voice for Choice Advocacy is one of only 2 organizations in this state that are 501c3. So we do lobbying. So our most of A Voice for Choice Advocacy's time is spent doing advocacy work, and in Sacramento we have 2 lobbyists hired, that type of thing. So that is our focus. We do less of the rallies and the grassroots. We do grassroots action alerts, but we do less of the sort of rallies and that type of thing. I personally feel that organizations that do a lot of rallies, I get that rallies rallies are a good way to show support and get the media's attention. But if you have a limited time and effort and money, I would look for groups that resonate more with what you want to do and are actually, making a difference in the fight, not just saying they're doing things and not really doing things. I think there's a lot of money that's going into legal suits, and most lawyers are requiring payment for those. A Voice for Choice Advocacy hasn't done, we had one lawsuit in 2016 against SB 277, and it was unsuccessful, unfortunately. It was a very, very well-written lawsuit, and it was written, I made our lawyers write it from a pro-vax perspective. It went up against bodily autonomy, parental rights, and the right to education, All three of those have been upheld in the Supreme Court. We pay, a Voice for Choice Advocacy paid for Voice for Choice. It was under a Voice for Choice R501c3, paid for that lawsuit fully. None of our plaintiffs paid for the legal representation. And that's a Voice for Choice Advocacy's perspective, is if we're going to have a lawsuit, we're not going to have our plaintiffs pay for it. But I would say, I don't think there's another organization. Oh, PJI, Pacific Justice Institute, is another one that does that. But other than us two, all other organizations are raising money for those lawsuits and are sort of requiring plaintiffs to do a lot of that fundraising. So, I think that's that. You have to look at what's important to you and what organizations are that resonate with you. Which ones do you feel? Some people are very involved in local, very close-knit communities that do stuff actively and meet once a week in person or once a month in person, and those may resonate with you, or a larger organization may resonate with you. It really depends on what resonates. How many lawsuits are there against vax mandates, especially against schools? What is the timeline of these lawsuits? When can the lawsuit have an outcome effect? Do you think that lawsuits have a chance of stopping school mandates and other mandates in California? So there are a lot of lawsuits. They are, I have one of my interns that keeps a running list on them, and there are many, many lawsuits, both in California and outside of California, on the vaccine mandates. Any of them that have gone through to any place, most of them have not succeeded. I will say the ones that have succeeded have mostly been lawsuits where there wasn't a religious exemption included for employees, and they have won and gotten a stay saying that there has to be a religious exemption for the California schools. So there is definitely one with LAUSD, and there is definitely one with San Diego Unified. I do know of two other lawsuits, one that's possibly from a Voice for Choice Advocacy. We're looking into it. We're looking at plaintiffs for one of the other school districts, and I believe there's another organization that is looking to do one in another school district. But as you mentioned, or what you implied, was these aren't quick fixes. They don't happen overnight. The TRO, which is the temporary restraining order, which would stop it in its place until the lawsuit goes through, those are not, they just don't happen. I actually would say against doing a TRO, a temporary restraining order, because more often than not, the lawsuit fails at that point. So the ones in LAUSD, they had a hearing last week. They tried to get a temporary restraining order. They were unsuccessful. They are trying to get into the courtroom in November before the mandate goes into place, but they have not succeeded at that yet. But usually the timeline of a lawsuit, it takes at least a year to get to get to a judgment. And that's, probably takes 6 months to get to a judgment, but then most likely there's going to be an appeal to it because one side or the other appeals it. The losing side appeals it. So these are not quick fixes. The chance of winning them, I think, is actually quite low. What we have seen is that Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is the 1905 law, is being upheld over and over again, saying that the state and the school district, the state has the police powers, especially in a pandemic. So some school districts are mandating the COVID vaccine while it's still only emergency use authorization. Is this legal? Are there lawsuits against this? Will they be successful? So there were lawsuits against, I think it was the University of California, about this emergency use authorization. The problem is that the lawsuits take such a long time that by the time the lawsuit comes around, it's a moot point because they're then approved for that age group. I mean, we're looking at, the 7th grade and above being approved in February. And I think it's part of the reason why Newsom said that he is doing it. He's requesting the Cdph to do it when they are approved, because it takes out that piece. So I think you could put lawsuits in place, but they won't be answered in time. Do you have any more details about Gavin Newsom being injured by the third booster shot? Defender has reported he got Guillain-Barré from a source. So it's an interesting one. So he didn't have a third booster. He only had a second one because the first shot he got was a J&J shot, and the second shot he got was a Moderna shot. But a week before he got the Moderna shot, he did get a flu vaccine. So there were reports that he had gotten Guillain-Barré syndrome and been vaccine injured, and that was why he was not seen for 12 days. I also heard it from a decent source or from somebody I trust. What has come out today, today he said that he was at the economic summit in Monterey, and he said, his kids basically had an intervention and said that, they didn't want him and his wife to be away for Halloween, and that he needed to spend more time with his kids. And so they did Halloween. They went to Boo Fest, which is a soccer tournament in Sacramento. They basically got, he was out and about. He's been in the office. He brought the kids to the Capitol. And so, the question is that the case or is that not the case? I think people at Boo Fest said they saw him there. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I think if he was injured, I don't think there's any way that we would find out, given that they have, fully covered up if that were the real reason why. Okay. My child is in second grade and has an ME by a physician who has been disciplined. I have received a letter from my school saying the following statements pertaining to the new law, January 2021. As of January 2021, all medical exemptions issued after 2015 must be reissued through the California Immunization Registry. If your child has an existing medical exemption issued from CARE ME, you must have the physician update each year. A medical exemption or personal exemption filed after 2015 is no longer valid. So, if the physician has not been disciplined, then all of that information is incorrect. If you have a medical exemption that is grandfathered by a physician who's not been disciplined, that medical exemption is grandfathered in. If they have been disciplined, then that information is correct. If you need help with this, just send me an email and just put in help with medical exemption for school, and I can send you a letter. But where you want to go is if you go to shotsforschool.org, number 3 and number 16 pertain to this and say that you can be grandfathered in. For COVID saliva testing, is it bad because they have your DNA, or is testing option result in them having your DNA? So all testing options result in them having your DNA. The question is, what do they do with that DNA? There is a question whether, they are collecting, this is their way of collecting DNA and selling it to China. Could that be happening? Yes. Is it happening? We don't know. The piece there is that your DNA has been collected already. I mean, every single child that's born in California in a hospital has their DNA collected in a blood swab. Every time you give blood, you're handing over your DNA. If you have a blood draw, they've got your DNA. And so, is this a real issue? It could be. Are there some people that won't do saliva testing or any COVID testing because of it? Absolutely. Do we know that companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, that they were also selling, DNA and genetic information, not that it's yours, but just in general? Yes. Are they using it for research? Yes. There are companies, there are labs. If you get a saliva test, call the lab and ask them what they do with your sample, and if they do anything more with it than just test it and throw it away. Do they keep it? How long do they keep it for? Those types of questions. I definitely would look into it more if that is concern to you. Unfortunately, it seems that as a whole, American citizens are not standing up against the mandates, or maybe it just seems so because the media fails to report on those that do. Are the other countries whose citizens are more outraged and disturbed by mandates passports that are actually doing something about it? So the answer is yes. I think one of the key things with the United States is that we are such a large country, and it takes, California is the size of some of the some of the countries in Europe, larger than some of the countries in Europe. For somebody who lives in San Diego, it is a huge trip to come to Sacramento. To go to Washington, D.C. is a 6-hour flight. If you're in Europe and you take a 6-hour flight, you're in, Russia, or, you're far away. So, I think it is easier. I will say, I think it is easier for people in Europe to look like they have larger protests, because it is easier for them to get from one side of the country to another side of the country to all come together. So I think there are people in the US that are protesting, but it is just much more fragmented. Do I think there is failure to report by the media? Yes, 100%. Do I think there is more outrage in places like Europe? I do, but I think it also is the fact that they are able to come together more easily and more centrally. Is there a chance the school can administer vaccines without parents' knowledge or consent? Yes, there is, especially in San Francisco. So San Francisco, the city of San Francisco and the county of San Francisco passed an ordinance saying that children 12 plus can give consent to getting the COVID vaccine. They would try to contact the parents, but if they can't contact the parents, then the child can give consent. So yes, the answer is it does happen. My recommendation is that you put something on file with your school saying that you do not consent to them getting any medical treatment unless it has the signature of both parents. I don't think, I would do that for any medical treatment, or if you are, if you allow them to give Advil, Tylenol, those types of things, then be very specific what your child is allowed to get. But yes, many schools have that as part of their health form. So they have something that says, can the school administer these things? And sometimes it's a list that you get to check off what can be administered. Other times it's just a blanket statement. There's also emergency times that schools, if your child has an accident, that they can administer emergency treatment. Vaccines don't fall under emergency treatment, but you want to make that clear. So is it worth putting a letter together with that? Yes. There are some organizations that have put a letter out to that effect. I don't think you need one of those letters. I think you just need to write a statement saying, the parent of X child, I do not agree to X school or anyone, any staff or anyone else from outside of the school administering any medical treatment without, including vaccines, without both parents' written signatures. Okay. If a child's medical exemption is no longer valid because California doctor wrote it has disciplinary action, will other states accept it? Is the disciplinary action making a medical exemption invalid just in California? So it depends on the state, because many states only allow medical exemption from an in-state doctor. But if you're in a state that allows a medical exemption from an out-of-state doctor, then yes, but most of those states have a religious or a personal belief exemption. So I'm not sure I would submit a medical exemption in that case, because I don't really want the school to know my child's medical standing. Okay, where do teachers' unions stand? What is their position on school mandates for students, for teachers? So it really depends on the teachers' union. So for example, UTLA, which is the LA Teachers Union, is all for mandates. They're fine with the teachers getting shunted and the students getting shunted over to City of Angels. But there are other educator unions such as CEMA, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, that have put up a cease and desist for the mandate for teachers, and just the teachers doing either the vaccination standard or testing. So it really depends on the union and where they stand. It's individual. Okay, is having to enter medical exemptions in the CARE database just a California thing, or is it a federal thing? It's just a California thing. If a child has an IEP, are they exempt from all childhood vaccines? I answered that, yes. Is there a certain form for this IEP exemption? No. You just tell the school that your child doesn't need to comply with the vaccine requirements because they're on an IEP. Again, the organization for IEPs and special needs that I recommend, if you're having issues, try it yourself first, but if you're having issues, is Educate Advocate, and their website is educateadvocateca.com. Is there a letter sample or template that parents can use for a petition for parents to sign and submit to the school board about not mandating COVID vaccines or to the state? So There isn't a petition that I know of, but there are school districts that have written resolutions and voted on the resolutions to say that they will not comply with mandates. One of those is Apple Valley. There's a list of them that I have, but Apple Valley is one of them. The key there is that if you get a copy of the resolution, the key there is making sure that you have the school board votes before you present it to the school board and before you have them vote on it. So you need to make sure, because the worst thing is, and we've seen this happen in the past, the worst thing is you go to the school board, you find one school board member that's on board with with preventing the vaccine mandates. That school board member brings it forward, and then it's voted down by the majority of the school board members. And then it looks like, even though it's not actually openly said, it looks like the school board wants the mandates. And so you really want to make sure that you have talked to all the school board members and gotten their input and tried to convince them. If you have the votes, then absolutely put a resolution forward to the school board, but you have to make sure that you have the votes first. And it may be something that you can get the votes over time. So it may be just an education process of why you don't want the mandate. You have been so right in the past year and more with all of your premonitions. Do you think that the government employees, state employees in California will end up being mandated to get the shots soon and no longer have the choice of getting tested instead? We can get tested now in lieu of shots. So my premonitions are premonitions. They're just me reading a lot and knowing a lot and keeping my ears and eyes open. But thank you. Do I think the state, it will be really interesting to see. So SEIU 1000, which is the largest state employee union, has made it very clear that they are against the mandates and don't want the mandates. And so I think it really depends on that union. For the most part, when we have seen vaccine and testing in place, the next step, when the vaccination rates don't get up there, the next step is to switch to required vaccination. Having said that, I think the really interesting piece of this is the whole prison guard issue, where Newsom is trying to prevent the mandates for prison guards, and he gone to court on it. And it's kind of like, okay, why are you saying that you don't want prison guards to be mandated but everyone else to be mandated? And the reason, of course, is money. The prison guards and the prison system is probably one of the most influential and most financially donate the greatest amount to the California legislature and to the governor. Does the stay order issued Saturday affect federal contractor employee or just the OSHA portion? It just is the OSHA portion, the federal piece of it. The federal contractors, I think there is a lawsuit against that, but I don't believe it's been ruled on. Can a child with a learning accommodation in private school get an exemption separate from a personal or religious exemption? So if you have learning accommodations, so the way it works is an IEP, which is only provided by the public school system. An IEP will allow you to not have the vaccine required. But if you're in a private school, some private schools recognize that. If you have an IEP from the public school system, some private schools recognize it and exempt you from the vaccinations. Some private schools do not. It really depends on the school. Part of the issue is if the private school recognizes it, then then they should also provide the services, and many private schools won't provide the services. What are the options for teachers who are unvaccinated and are being forced to vaccinate? So and I say this at the beginning of I say it at the beginning of all of my religious exemption writing workshops, but I also say it over and over again, just if you hear me speak. And that is, so for teachers, you have a religious exemption. I would submit a religious exemption or a medical exemption if you can get one. But I would submit one of those. If you are then put on a leave of absence or not allowed to teach for whatever reason, then I would look into what are your options. And as what I was saying before was, I am a big believer in you have to have a plan B. You have to have some other option. So if you are forced to take the vaccine, or if your children are forced to take the vaccine, what would you do? Would you vaccinate? Would you move out of state? Would you find another job? Would you homeschool? Would you, would you create your own business? what is it that you're going to do? And I think everyone should plan now and have their plan B in place now, so that if that ever happens, you know what you're doing, because it takes more than 3, 4, 5, 6 months to start a business, to move, to get your kids set up with homeschooling. Whatever those things are, they take time to work out. You can't just do them overnight. Some people can do them overnight, but for the most of us, you can't do them overnight. And so you need to have a plan. What is your plan? And for teachers, there are a lot of parents looking for teachers to homeschool pods. So the 5, 6, 7, 10 kids of one grade, or across many grades, that are looking to have homeschooling options and have a tutor that teaches those kids. So for me, it's getting out of the system and what can you do? Okay, my kids have a medical exemption from Dr. Sutton. Are those exemptions invalid now? If we get a new ME from a new doctor, can it include COVID vax and all the other ones? So Dr. Sutton has not been disciplined yet. She's in that process. So I think it will happen soon. When that happens, then yes, her exemptions will be invalid. If you get a medical exemption from a new doctor, it can include the COVID. Well, actually, it can't include the COVID vaccine. So in order to get a new medical exemption, it has to be put through the CARE ME system, which is an electronic system. In order to do that, you have to input all of your information. You then go to the doctor pulls up your information, puts in the exemption, goes through every vaccine that there is, and says, this vaccine is not required, permanent. Is it temporary or permanent? And the reason why. And then, but the problem there is that the COVID vaccine is not on that list yet. So it wouldn't count right now, because the doctor wouldn't be able to put it in, because the COVID vaccine is not part of that system. And then once the doctor puts that all through, it goes to the school. What we've been seeing is that even people who have, there are many medical exemptions that are put through the CARE ME system. I should rephrase that. There aren't very many MEs that get put through the CARE ME system, but many of them that are actually revoked and pushed back, and require the doctor to give further medical information as to why the ME was granted. So even if you get a medical exemption, we've seen them kicked back a month or two after they've been submitted. If I'm fired because my religious accommodation is not approved, am I eligible for unemployment? So if you are fired, if your religious exemption is denied and you are fired, then yes, because you followed. The key is, did you follow? The key question is, did you follow company policy? If you can say yes, you followed company policy, then you can file for unemployment. And you were fired, you can file for unemployment. If you didn't follow company policy, so for example, if you were told you have to vaccinate or have an exemption, and you chose not to do either of those, then you do not get unemployment. Hi, thank you for doing this. Can you please share some info on religious exemptions for green card applications? So if you have a green card application, you can get a religious exemption. It has to be very specifically worded, and you have to go through a very specific process. If you need the help with that, I have the documentation of what you need. You need to get your lawyers to follow the exact procedure, and you also need to take one of my religious exemption writing workshops, which are free, in order to get your religious exemption written for it, but there's much more to it than that. And if you send me an email, just put green card application in the subject line, I can help you on that. In the exemption letter for a child under 10, should the parent write specifically what accommodations the child is willing to perform? So I don't recommend putting in accommodations in a religious exemption in any format unless you're specifically asked for it. So I wouldn't put it in there. I would get the exemption approved and then see what the accommodations are. How long have you been doing this, Christina? You've taught me a lot, and I thank you for fighting all these years. I was once pro-vax, but I'm now against vaccines. Also, what has been going on? New bills, laws, should I be worried? So I have been an advocate and an activist on this issue since 2015, since SB 277. I have been in the vaccine issue since before my oldest daughter was born, and she's 16. So about 17 years was when I had my first run down the rabbit hole on vaccines. I started off with my daughter, and I wanted as natural a birth as possible. At that time, there was nothing on the internet. There was hardly any internet. And I watched Sherry Tenpenny's 2 videos that she had, DVDs that she had. And I started because I had pulled down a birth plan and I wanted as natural a birth as possible. And one of the questions on it was, are you going to give your child the hepatitis B vaccine? And I looked at it and was just like, okay, all I know about hepatitis B is you get it from sex. And so why is my child at 12 hours old having sex? And so I sort of went down the rabbit hole. If you'd asked me before that, I also had very minimal vaccines. I grew up in England, and there, when I was growing up, you didn't get a lot of vaccines. And so I had all of the childhood diseases naturally. So I had measles, I had mumps, I had chickenpox, I had whooping cough, I had scarlet fever, I had, you name it, I had it. And so I also had limited vaccines. Most of them were travel vaccines, and I didn't think anything of it. If you asked me what was in a vaccine, I would have said saline and the virus. I had no idea. And it was the hepatitis B vaccine that got me going down that rabbit hole. The interesting thing, I was thinking about it probably 6 months ago, somebody was asking me about that. And the interesting thing is, if it hadn't been the hepatitis B vaccine and it had been, for example, the polio vaccine, I'm not sure that I would have gone down the rabbit hole, because I would have been like, oh, okay, yeah, my child should be, prevented from having polio. And I don't know that I would have even thought twice about it. So it was really the hepatitis B vaccine that triggered me and got me going. But I, until 2015, that was between my ex, my pediatrician, and my school, my kids' school, that knew that my kids weren't vaccinated. And it was 2015 that I started getting into this, and I now live my life doing it. Can parents submit a personal belief exemption or religious exemption on behalf of their child? So if your child is under 18, yes, you would be the one submitting it. I wouldn't submit, as I said, I wouldn't submit anything until you absolutely have to. Okay, do you know anything about the LAUSD daily pass and what is happening with the data they are collecting? Who's reviewing exemptions? Are they being sent to Rich Japan? Good question. So the LAUSD daily pass, our recommendation is you do not put an exemption in there until the very last day. Now, having said that, all the exemptions that we've heard of people that have submitted them have been denied. But what happens is when you put your information for an exemption into the daily pass, you get denied that day and you get shunted over to City of Angels right away. Whereas if you want your kid to be in school for another 2 weeks before the mandate comes down and they are forced to go to City of Angels, I wouldn't put your exemption in before that. I have no idea who is collecting data. I mean, clearly LAUSD is, and who is reviewing the exemptions. I think it's a pretty automated process. It seems that the parents that I've heard have submitted an exemption through the daily pass get a response within sort of 5 hours. So it's that, or they're just not, they've got somebody in charge that doesn't have much else to do. And are they being sent to Senator Pan? I have no idea, but I'm sure the data, summarized data, probably is being sent to him. I'm pretty sure he has, he's interested in that. Did California have a personal belief exemption before 2015? Yes, they did. Before 2013, it was just on the vaccine card. It was a blue vaccine card. And on the bottom of the second page, it said, vaccinations are against my personal beliefs, so my child is not vaccinated, and you signed it. 2013 was the beginning of Senator Pan and his ordeal in this, and our ordeal in this. In 2013, he passed a law that required this form, there to be a standardized personal belief exemption form, and you had to go to your doctor and get it signed saying that your doctor advised you of the risks of the disease and the benefits of the vaccine. And what was interesting, I remember that being passed, and I had 2 very young children at the time. And I remember that being passed and thinking, oh, it's not a big deal because my children are, we have that conversation with our pediatrician all the time. That's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. But realistically, we should have all been awake then. Is the vaccine planned to be required by January of 2022 or September of 2022? So I'm assuming you mean the COVID vaccine for children. Most likely it will be July or September of 2022. Are there any online schools with no vaccine mandates? So most online schools don't have vaccine mandates. What kind of masks can your workplace legally require for the unvaccinated? So if you're in California, there is I don't think it's a requirement that you have to wear an N95, but N95 masks have to be made available for unvaccinated and vaccinated, actually, for anyone who wants them. I think if you are working from a private company, they can probably require whatever they want to require of you. So somebody says, I am not understanding the exemptions. I was in the understanding you cannot throw any new vaccines in later than SB 277. I thought if they wanted to add another vaccine, it would have to become a new law. So the answer is yes. In order for them to add a new vaccine to the actual list in statute, it has to be passed by the legislature. But there is a number 11 on the list of diseases that are covered by the school vaccination laws that says that Cdph, the Department of Public Health, can add a vaccine if they deem it necessary, and if the ACIP and the AAP and some other organizations recommend it, but it has to have a personal belief exemption if they do that, if Cdph adds it. Why do you recommend pulling money out of Vanguard, Blackrock, etc.? Those are companies where many people have retirement accounts like Roth IRAs. What exactly is the fear? So there is a video called Monopoly, goes through and explains that basically Vanguard and BlackRock and all of those own the world and dictate the world. They're even above the World Economic Forum. And so my perspective is I do not want to put my money in places where people have that much control over my life. And so I will pull it out of those places. But if you look up, actually, it's on LouRockwell.com, but it's a video that goes through basically who owns the world and who owns and Vanguard, BlackRock, and all of them are at the top of that. So yes, you have Roth IRAs. You can, I have actually asked this question of other people that I know. You can pull your Roth, or you can transfer your Roth IRAs and other IRAs out into smaller banks or into cryptocurrency. There are lots of different options. You don't have to stay in those. You can't pull your money out without tax infringement or tax ramifications, but you can transfer your IRA somewhere else. Okay, what do you think will happen for women couple trying to get pregnant, fertility treatment, or pregnant women? Will there be an exemption made for these instances? So often there is. So many companies are saying that if you want to get pregnant, or you are pregnant or breastfeeding, that you can get a medical exemption and they'll accept that. But some don't. Do you think that people will realize that the vaccine isn't that effective and shouldn't be mandated, and that's going to stop, and that it's going to be non-stop boosters? I don't think people are there yet. I think the majority of people that took the first 2 vaccines are excited to get the 3rd vaccine, unless they were coerced into it, in which case they were already against mandates. Are schools allowed to share a copy of my child's medical exemption with Cdph? Yes, they are. They should redact all information, so or personal information, so they should redact your child's name. But yes, if that information is redacted, yes. The other piece is, if your school is audited, then they have the ability to show the full medical exemption without the redaction. If the Supreme Court approves blocking the mandate for the large businesses or hospital or government worker, can those people who were fired from being vaccinated sue their employers or able to get their job back? I believe the answer is yes to that. I believe that's part of the court case. If we move to Texas, would the life be easier from the perspective of COVID mandates? Yes, I believe so. Does California 277 currently provide any exemptions for school-age children? Only a medical exemption, and they are basically impossible to get. How can we invoke the power of the sheriffs to uphold their oaths and the law? So many sheriffs do uphold the power of the law, but the sheriffs only have so much power, and the key there is the sheriffs are elected. So you want to elect a sheriff that will do what you want them to do, or what you ask them to do. Unfortunately, we live in a state that has very, one-sided politics. And so the sheriffs that get elected are elected by the people, and the people in certain areas believe in certain things. Will hospitals require you to have the vaccine to get surgery. So there are definitely some, we've heard of people getting transplants that have been required to get the vaccine in order to get the transplant. So I do think that will come into effect some places. I think you will be able to find healthcare facilities. And I think, the more segregation there is, the more there are going to be companies or people that see the opportunity for doing things for unvaccinated people. And heck, I mean, if you want to find a new job, or not a new job, if you want to create a new business, do it with that in mind. Because I think there are a lot of people that will frequent your business because of it. What do you think will happen with the vaccine long-term effects? I think they will be brushed under the carpet. I don't think we will see the long-term effects similar to the long-term effects we see from regular, traditional vaccines. Should we wait filing a religious exemption at high school until we get asked to do so? Yes, I would not file any exemptions anywhere unless you absolutely have to. Do you know where we can get saliva testing for less cost or employer paid? We're in San Diego. Yes, so if you go to a Voice of Choice Advocacy /org/COVID testing, you have a list of labs that are doing COVID testing for free or covered by your insurance. We also have on there a list of the optimal testing requirements that you should go to your employer and request. When he said, what does the federal court ruling really mean in the long term? So it means that we don't know what it means in the long term. In the short term, it means that people cannot, that regulation cannot be implemented. It really depends on what happens. That was a stay. It was a temporary order, an emergency order. So what it said was, we're going to not allow it to be until it says that we are not going to be allowed to be put in place until we hear the whole court proceeding. So while the court proceeding is going on, which could take, a year or so, that the stay is in place and that it can't be implemented. If they require masks of only unvaccinated students, is there anything that we can do about it? It's a hard question, and I really don't think there is in a pandemic. If it's not in a pandemic, then I think there is, but I think the police powers hold. The key thing there is, the other piece is that, it depends on how it's implemented. We saw for the very brief period of time, at least here in the Bay Area where I live, where the vaccinated didn't have to wear masks, the unvaccinated did, that, there's no policing of that. Nobody knows who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated. And so it sort of became a mishmash of people. So I think it really depends on how it's implemented. Do you think the pandemics are a hoax to brainwash people and for big pharma and government to make more money? So I don't think they're a hoax. Do I think COVID exists? I do think COVID exists. Do I think it is any more deadly than the flu? No, I don't. Do I think that there has been a long-term plan to get people vaccinated and to control people and to get more in people's lives and limit freedom? 100% yes. I mean, if you, and it's why, the person said, I have premonitions. I don't have premonitions. I just read what the government puts out there and what, the World Economic Forum puts out there. And I mean, if you read any of those things, you could have been reading them in 2000 and I started reading them in 2015. You start reading them and their bigger plan is much, much bigger than what we see on a day-to-day basis happening. My child's school will only allow vaccinated parents in the classroom to volunteer. Is this a state mandate they're following? Except being vaccinated, is there any other way, like testing, for me to be allowed in the classroom? Will a personal exemption for me work? It seems that segregation, that I cannot be in the classroom or join my field trip with my child due to vaccination status. Yes, this is happening all over the place. I would submit a religious exemption or a medical exemption with testing and say, please explain why this is not good enough and why you are promoting segregation and discrimination. I would also pull up, most schools have a diversity, equity, justice, inclusion, some form of those letters statement or a non-discrimination statement, I would bring that up and say that you're being discriminated against and this is not what the school stands for. And so, I would just push on them and push on them. If you can have more parents do it as well, have them come with you. Can they do it? Yeah, they can do it. Unfortunately, there isn't a law in place, but schools can make up their own policies on things. So my children's school doesn't. My younger daughter's school, they don't allow any parents on campus at all ever right now. They used to, but they don't anymore. Since the government keeps telling companies to move forward with vaccine mandates, even though they stay in place, is that legal on the part of the company? So if your company is a private corporation, they can do whatever they want, and they can put whatever policy in place. Since most people are too willing to get multiple COVID shots and seem to be okay with the COVID vax mandates, do you think it will in turn lead to regular flu shots being mandated? I do think there is a greater scheme. Yes, I do think that the flu shots are going to be, but at the same time, I don't know that they can really enforce that. I think, but having said that, I think the pharmaceutical industry has shot themselves in the foot many times in pushing too hard. For example, if in 2015, there were only 2.7% of children that had personal belief exemptions in 2015. If they had not pushed that law, if Senator Pan had not pushed that law, I would not be sitting here talking to you. So to me, they've shot themselves in the foot because the anti-vaccine and again, anti-mandate, people against vaccines, mandatory vaccines, have there's huge numbers of them now. So I don't know that a flu shot being mandated would. Do I think they'll try? Yes, I think they'll try. If you look at, there's a 2020 healthy people and 2030 healthy people. The goal there is to get all adults fully vaccinated, and that's fully vaccinated on, shingles, pneumococcal, MMR if you haven't had it, a whole bunch of hepatitis B just got added to the adult schedule. So there is a greater goal to get all adults vaccinated. Yes. I heard visitors to hospitals and ERs are required to show proof of vaccination. How do you deal with this? Usually it's proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. So just check with your hospital. If you are there is a certain list of people that are exempt from that, such as parents of children, but you do still have to show a negative test. My boys are in 6th grade and their middle school has announced they have a new click system to register kids so they can keep track of vaccinated kids. I asked the principal why they need to know, and she said, so that if there's an outbreak in a class, kids that are vaccinated can stay at school and the kids that are not can go home for 10 days. Is this legal? Yes, this is current California guidelines, not policy, but guidelines that vaccinated students are allowed to stay in class, unvaccinated students are sent home to quarantine. It sometimes is less than 10 days. So if you do negative PCR testing along the way of those 10 days, it shortens the requirement. Do you think the government wants to depopulate the nation with the COVID vaccine? Bill Gates said we could get a lower population by 10 to 15% with new vaccines. Is there a possibility that that's the goal? Yeah. Do I have any idea? No, I'm not that. I'm not that into the inside world here. Do I think that there is a fear of overpopulation by people like Bill Gates? Yes, absolutely. Do I have any idea if that's their agenda? Could it be? Yes, 100%. Do I have any idea? No. Okay. My work said they are ending employee COVID testing at the end of the year. However, unvaxxed are required to test weekly. Can they make unvaxxed pay for their own testing? What if the person has a medical exemption? Does the employer have to pay for it as an accommodation? So yes, they can. So more and more employers are doing this, that they are saying get vaccinated, and if you're unvaccinated, you have to pay for your own testing. There are free testing facilities in every county. We have requested every county have an option to do saliva testing, although currently I think Santa Clara County and Orange County are the only ones I know of that have free saliva testing. But the other piece is that as this transition happens, insurance companies are picking up the cost of testing. So I would go to, if you are interested in, or whatever test you are interested in, find out where you can have your insurance cover the testing, or if there's free county testing. Can you share with us the private universities in California that you know of that are not accepting religious exemptions for students? One is Caltech, others. So I do know that Santa Clara University does not accept them, and Menlo College does not accept them. I think those are the only three that I know of that are not accepting religious exemptions. So do you suggest sending an unvaccinated LAUSD 8th grader to school with the CHG cease and desist letter? I'm assuming you mean like on the whatever the next date is after the requirement comes into play. Again, I do not recommend putting kids in the middle of this. Your child, if they are sent to school, they will be sent to the principal's office. They will sit in the principal's office until you pick them up, and or if they're old enough, they'll be told to go home. So, I personally, I wouldn't put my kid in that situation. If you feel comfortable with your kid being in that situation and your child wants to be in that situation, then by all means do it. Again, I think you have to make it as a decision for your child and your family and what's best. Do charter schools fall under the umbrella of public schools? Yes, they do. Have I vaccinated my kids? No, my kids are fully unvaccinated, although I lost vaccine decision-making in the court system. And so they could be vaccinated by my ex at any point, but thankfully they are old enough to fight that battle, although I hate having them in the middle of it. My child is in preschool and has been recommended for an IEP evaluation. Before even scheduling the evaluation, they want a copy of the vaccines, which we don't have. How do we deal with this? So you are not required to give the vaccines for an evaluation. If you're running into this problem, I would again recommend Educate, Advocate as the organization to go to help you. Newsom's executive order mandating COVID vax for K through 12 says that it is a dangerous childhood vaccine. How can it state that the regular flu deaths from children are higher than the COVID-19 deaths? They would love to have the flu vaccine on there too. The key there is, and this became the sort of, it opened my eyes in the ACIP, which is the American Committee of Immunization Practices, the CDC organization that approves or puts vaccines on the schedule. They had a meeting on November 2nd to add the COVID vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds and to approve that. And the CDC director came on at the very beginning of it, and she said, remember, when you're voting today, we added the chickenpox vaccine to the schedule, and there were, and don't quote me on the numbers, but it was less than 20 hospitalizations for chickenpox, and I think less than like 6 deaths from chickenpox the year that the chickenpox was added to the requirements. So that is their threshold. And that was the chickenpox vaccine is on the California schedule. So, that their threshold is very, very low. I think they would like to have the flu vaccine on there. I think there's just been too much pushback for that. Do you have any opinion on when the emergency orders will end, both in California and for our country? And if they end, will this ridiculous mandates have to stop? So I have no idea when they will end. They should have ended. The case counts in California have been low enough at certain periods of time that we should not be in a state of emergency anymore. We have vaccines, we have treatments, we have, we are not in a state of emergency right now, but we are. So I have no idea, and it basically is up to the governor. California, unlike some other states, doesn't have a way for the state of emergency to be removed or a time limit on it. They do it. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It can be removed if the legislature wants to remove it, but our legislature doesn't want to remove it. They're quite happy with Newsom having the power that he has. If the state of emergency is removed, every executive order that Newsom made under that state of emergency goes away. It's no longer applicable. So anything that is not a law that was an emergency order would go away. And so that would be huge. So much of this would go away, but not all of it. Okay, if you have a religious exemption question, please take our religious exemption workshop and I answer all of those questions there. How can affidavits be used against vaccine mandates? So I'm not a big fan of affidavits. Affidavits basically are a statement and usually a notice of liability or something that involves usually common law. Common law is sort of the most basic law before you have any statutes or case law. I have not found them to be effective in this fight. And I think my question for you would be to ask the person that is suggesting that, what has been your success with these? Considering that the FDA changed the definition of vaccine after people pointed out that it's not a vaccine by their own definition and that Congress exempted them, how can we even talk about mandates? I agree with you. That is on a whole other level that is not, I'm going to say it's above my pay grade. I think there are, there are organizations like ICANN that are suing the FDA and that they've sort of taken on that fight. It's not, I agree that it needs to happen. It's not one that I'm involved in because I have so much other stuff I am focused on. I'm a teacher at a high school level. It's my understanding that teachers will be required to get the vaccine once the shot gets approved for 12 to 18-year-olds. Newsom said that it would be either December or July based on the FDA approval. Do all school districts allow for religious exemptions? So they have to allow, if you are an employee, you have to be allowed to have a religious exemption. The question becomes, what are the accommodations? So do they allow you to stay on campus? Or for example, like LAUSD, are they going to force you to do online teaching? So how come if someone gets one jab, then gets COVID, that doesn't count as fully vaccinated? The flip is also true. If you had COVID and you get one jab, which is the sort of recommendation if you have COVID, if you've had COVID, that still doesn't count as being fully vaccinated for employers. I think it's a great point. I don't have an answer for you. And until the CDC says something, the answer is just going to be, well, two vaccines is what counts as fully vaccinated. Please, can you clarify a 504 versus a IEP? My son has a 504 in the district, has not required vaccination. I thought the 504 falls under an IEP umbrella, even though it's a 504. Is my district clueless and we've gotten lucky? Yes, you have gotten lucky, and yes, they are clueless. The IEP is an individualized education program. It's for special needs, and it is more on an academic level from the perspective of there are, I wish, educate advocate has the right words. A 504 is really medical issues. So if your child has something like asthma or anxiety or depression and needs more time with their work or needs accommodations in that sense, an IEP is where a child gets services from the school. So it may be occupational therapy, it may be speech therapy, it may be that they're in a special classroom for part of their day, those types of things. So that's the difference. And it's an IEP that is specifically mentioned in the statute. I read exemptions through the care system can only be looked into if the school's vaccination status is under the percentage. Is this the case? Yes and no. So that is the only time that they can, or no, sorry, they will absolutely be reviewed if that happens, but they can also be reviewed at any other time. And I have to say, I had that misconception as well until probably 3 months ago when people were submitting, when I had 2 medical exemptions submitted through the Care ME system. The school's percentage was high. The doctor had only written their 2 exemptions, and both of them were reviewed and revoked. And when I looked at the statute, it actually says that they can be, it's not that, it's only under those criteria that they definitely will be reviewed, but they can't, any other exemptions can be reviewed as well. So my public high school in the San Francisco Bay Area will be requiring vaccinating COVID to attend in person next semester. No mention of a religious exemption or personal belief exemption. If they haven't mentioned them, I would go ahead and ask them if they have I wouldn't even ask them that. I would say, how do you submit an exemption? And then she goes on to say, what about public colleges in California? So University of California and Cal State require the COVID vaccine, and for the COVID vaccine, they have religious exemptions, but they also require other vaccinations such as the MMR, I think meningococcal, Tdap, and those ones do not have a religious exemption. You have to have a medical exemption for those. Can you take on a new job while on paid administrative leave? I don't know. I'm not, as I said, I'm not an employment lawyer. I know you can do it because I asked it of our lawyers if you're on unpaid leave, but I don't know about paid leave. I guess, you know what, probably it depends on your contract. So would you have been able to take another job while you were working? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think you could. My doctor said that the HPV vaccine was an important vaccine for the brain. What exactly does HPV vaccine do for men? Plus, I'm 19 and I have not gotten the vaccine. I have no idea what it does for your brain because HPV is a cancer. HPV is cancer, human papillomavirus, which is a cervical cancer. For men, the vaccine, there's something to do with throat cancer, that men can get HPV in their throats. There's a book by Mary Holland, is one of the authors, and there's two other authors on the HPV vaccine, and I would recommend reading that. It has something to do with law in the title, or on the HPV vaccine on trial, I believe is the name of it. If you want to know about the HPV vaccine, that's one I would read. Are there recommended ways to have our voices heard in our cities, states, communities, other than sending emails? I'm not sure what else to do. So I highly recommend getting involved with your board of supervisors, your board of education, your school board, even if you send your kids to a private school, because many of the private schools follow what the public schools do, and your district legislatures. So your assembly member and your senator, but your California senator, not your California state senator, not the senator that goes to Washington. Those 5 people / groups are the people you need to get involved with on your county level or city level, and go to all of their meetings. Find out when their meetings are and go to them and speak at them. They all have public comment. Some of them are still online, but they all have public comment at the very beginning, usually, where you can give comment on any topic. And the key there is to make your stand known. Most of the time, there are other people that want to go with you. So I do recommend joining. If you join a Voice for Choice Advocacy created sort of a local platform, local groups for called Stand Up California. So if you go to standupcalifornia.com, you can join your county group, and then you can get together with people who are also going to those meetings. But most counties have people that are active in going to those meetings. So there are labs, places that check your immunity, say that you have the antigen or the antibodies, and they give you a card or password that says you're naturally immune to COVID. Do you think we can use that card instead of a vaccination card to travel or get into places that need vaccination? I really think it depends on the policy of the place. Most places, I don't think so, unless it looks like a vaccine card. For the religious exemption, is it a good idea to ask a pastor to sign my exemption? Peggy Hall's husband does the signature in the religious exemption forms they offer. So you need to take my workshop. Do not download things from the internet on your religious exemption. It will be denied. I do not recommend using that letter. I've seen it denied multiple times. What is the likelihood of obtaining a medical exemption for children of a vaccine injured parent? Obtaining one a little higher than actually getting it approved. The likelihood of approval is 0 in California. For medical professionals, are religious exemptions accepted in California? Yes. Do I need to do the weekly self-COVID test, and do I need to send the results to somebody being self-employed? You do not. You may want to take a test just to sort of cover your butt, but you don't. You're responsible to you. What is your advice for college students looking to apply or transfer, go out of state? Sacramento County Police had said they weren't going to enforce lockdowns or curfews in the early days of COVID. Do you see them now enforcing anything? City of Sacramento have the vaccine requirement for businesses and restaurants, etc., like LA. So that is really enforced on a business level. So the businesses are the ones enforcing it, not the police. Also, any other Bay Area counties, cities besides San Francisco moving towards vaccine requirements? San Jose is. How strict is SF really? When will they be more strict? I heard from my cousin who lives in the Castro district that some cafes are open only to vaccinated, while some allow unvaxxed to sit outside. Some museums still open to unvaxxed. So my understanding of San Francisco is that you can sit outside. It's only inside that's restricted. So there are definitely places that allow you to come in, order your food and sit outside, or sit outside and order your food. That's part of the ordinance or part of the order. I think it's being pretty heavily implemented. We saw, In-N-Out Burger being closed down in San Francisco because they weren't implementing it. So even if places are not implementing it, I think there are two things happening. Either somebody finds out in the government and goes after them, or I do think there are people ratting businesses out. Does California only allow a medical exemption from a doctor in California? Yes. Dr. Drew said that recently that the shots were not really a vaccine, that they're more of a therapeutic because it only claims you can make sure you don't get as sick. What do you think? Are vaccines like this one, where it doesn't prevent infection, just claims to prevent a very bad infection of getting sick? So that's where the FDA and NIH changed the definition of the vaccine to include this. The real question is, do other vaccines, so for example, the pertussis vaccine doesn't stop you from getting pertussis, so it is similarly poor. I think it's which definition of vaccine do you adhere to? Is it the new one or the old one? In the old one, no, these are not vaccines. They are therapeutics. But in the new definition that we've created, we're in sort of the 1984 world of rewriting history. It does fall under it. Have you helped people in the military that needed exemptions? Yes, we have. Is there an IEP for college students? No. So somebody commented on they have a religious exemption form that doesn't give enough space to explain it. If it is a paper copy, you can always write "see attached" and attach a letter. Just if you do that, then make sure that you, when you attach the letter, that you answer every question that they've asked you, so that they can't say that you didn't answer the questions. What if your company say they won't take exemptions for testing? I haven't seen a company that will take exemptions for testing. So unless it's a medical exemption, but usually if it's a medical or a religious exemption for nasal swab testing, they'll tell you to do a saliva testing, or if you can't do a saliva test, to do a nasal swab test. So usually you can't get out of testing. My daughter's community college in San Mateo just declared that unvaccinated students can enter any building on campus or seek any type of in-person service, including buying books at the bookstore or seeking administrative service, starting January 2022. She'll be 17 in November. Can I write and submit a religious exemption for her, or does she have to write it herself? No, you would write it for her. If you submit it 17 in November. Yeah, so yes, so you would submit it on her behalf. My guess is they're saying that even if you have a religious exemption, you may not be able to come on campus. And that's a whole different story. If you're a full-time employee that works remotely for a private company in California, then does the vaccine mandate apply to you? It really depends on your company policy. I don't remember if in the mandate, the federal mandate, whether it was included or not if you work remotely. Where can I find resources to educate the school board about not mandating the COVID vaccine? Personally, I'm concerned about the effects of the vax on the growth and development of the child. I truly believe in the healthy immune system. So the key there is, I would go look at, I know Apple Valley is one of them. I have a list of the other ones, and I believe we posted them on our social media probably 3 or 4 days ago, although that's probably way down on our social media now, of the other cities that have, or the other school districts that have said that they will not implement the mandate. I would go look at Apple Valley and the arguments that they used and how they spoke about it, and sort of get tips from that. You can probably find the Apple Valley Unified School District, a video of their hearing. It was from probably the last hearing that they had, so probably mid to end of October. So I work for the state and I did not get the jab. They are requiring weekly testing in the presence of an administrator. I feel this is inhumane, derogatory, discriminating. I feel as though I'm a criminal taking a drug test. If I don't test, I'm threatened with loss of pay, forbidden to work on site, disciplinary action. What can I do to avoid this without losing my job? I can't retire right now. Is there any lawsuits that anyone is doing here in California? So there are some lawsuits. My recommendation is that you go to them and you go to your HR person and you say, is there any way for me to do this at home or to do this in privacy? So, can I take the test, do it and then bring it back to you. Some of them don't want you doing that because they want you doing it in front of them so that they can see that you're actually the one doing it. I would ask that it be done in a private office then, so that you're not, if it's out in the open, that you're not doing it out in the open in front of other people, and that you can do it at, a specific time when there aren't other people around. I heard that the vaccine can be transferred through skin during a COVID test. Is that true? I'm not sure I understand the question, but the COVID test, so there are theories. I won't say they're conspiracy theories because this year all those conspiracy theories came true. There are theories that the COVID test have some form of vaccine or something on them. I personally I don't recommend COVID tests that are nasal swabs or oral swabs because you don't know what's on that swab. Do we have the technology to do that? We do. Do I have any idea if the COVID test has that? I don't. No, we don't. And so I'm not sure what you mean by through the skin. I'm assuming you mean through the skin in your mouth and nose. But if that's not the answer we're looking for, then clarify, please. Are we still technically in a pandemic? Yes, we are still technically in a pandemic. Well, I think we could move to an endemic because it's just sort of, it's not, the levels aren't high, but I think they are waiting. My guess is they are waiting for the winter to see if there's another surge to determine if we're in a pandemic. I have slowly been encountering parents who are very concerned about vaccinating their kids, but are afraid to come out and say anything to other parents or schools. Any suggestions on how to reach out to parents and let them know they're not alone? You'd be really putting yourself out there to do something like handing out flyers, like, are you concerned, at school pickup or something. But everyone I meet is surprised to find others because they thought they were alone. I think this is a real issue. So I agree with you. I think it's amazing once you start finding the people, how you find more people. I think it needs to be kind of like telephone that's played, which is, you talk to 5 people, they talk to 5 people, they talk to 5 people, they talk to 5 people. And really to give a resource. So if you are a parent in a school, and I think it has to be done on a school level, and then possibly there being coordination between schools and in school districts or in certain areas. But I think it's fabulous. I think it takes somebody like you to make that first step and to have that first conversation. And as part of the conversation, when the parent says, I'm concerned, to say, oh, well, would you like to get together for coffee? Or should we get together in the park someday? Or, something that gets them together. And then to also say, if you know of anyone else, if you have this conversation with anyone else, and they're also, please let them know too, so that it becomes sort of, as I said, sort of like a telephone network, that you get more and more people, because I think it is only once you start speaking that you can do it. And I agree with you. I don't think it's something that you can do by, putting out a notice or handing out flyers or something like that. Okay, so I know you touched on it right at the beginning, but can you clarify the current PBE situation 5 to 11-year-olds? I know the governor's mandate doesn't apply until full approval. So if a school board mandates it in the meantime, they must offer a PBE, but can they say yes, and you can be part of the school, but can't attend in person? The answer is yes to that. The key here is that none of these schools or school districts should be mandating the vaccine at all. The only person that has jurisdiction to mandate it is Cdph. And so that's why there are lawsuits in various school districts to try and show them that there is no jurisdiction for that. But yes, at the very least, they should be offering a PBE. I have a child with severe medical needs. I'm concerned about not being allowed on school campus due to being unvaxxed. Any suggestions, thoughts? I assume you mean you personally as a parent not being allowed on school campus. I think you need to go talk to the principal about it and say, if there's an emergency situation, I have to be allowed on campus. And what happens if that's not the case? How would a lawsuit against the mandate from the perspective of no virus ever being isolated? There have been cases won in this way. So I would ask you, have there really been cases won in this way? I don't think there have been. I think if you look at each of those cases, and I have done so, they were won on different merits. Part of the argument was that there was no virus that has been isolated, but that wasn't what the cases won on. I think that there has not been enough evidence for me to say that this virus has not been isolated. So it has been isolated in the same way as the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella viruses have been isolated. It wasn't isolated initially, it was definitely genetically sequenced. But I think at this point, there is sequencing of the virus, and the virus has been found to be sequenced in that way. So I think that argument doesn't hold when you go down sort of looking at what does isolation actually mean. I think you go down sort of a rabbit hole that you don't end up with full confirmation that this virus has never been isolated. It has never been isolated in the way some people would like it to be isolated, but that's not how we isolate viruses in general. So if you're saying that the COVID virus does not exist, then you're also saying that measles, mumps, rubella doesn't exist. And there are some people that believe that. So, if that's part of, if you believe in, for example, terrain theory, then that's part of it. I believe that there is terrain theory. I believe that there is viral theory as well. And that's just my personal beliefs of what I've read. My friend's religious exemption was approved, but she has to find a remote position with the company in 45 days or she'll be terminated. She works for a pharmaceutical company. Any suggestions? So I would have her email me, because what it sounds like she's getting is unreasonable accommodations, not reasonable accommodations. And what she would need to do is she would need to appeal that. She would need to file an EEOC claim, and then she could have a lawsuit if that's the avenue that she would want to take. My work is allowing just testing, and they're accepting the vaccine by the end of the year. Why won't they allow just weekly testing? So I would ask them for weekly. I would submit a religious exemption and then see if they'll allow you to do weekly testing. So somebody said for religious exemptions, you can look at the Healthy American. Again, I don't recommend her site for downloading things. You need to write your religious exemption yourself. You cannot download things from anywhere on the internet and assume that it will be approved. Will school boards, districts be able to make a decision on the mandate, or will it be up to the governor? And so no, when the K through 12 comes through, it will be a mandate. The school boards and the school districts cannot fight it. Now, if they want to administer it or put it through, then that's a different story. So I think there may be some school districts that say we are not implementing this mandate. And then the question becomes, because it's only regulations, then the question becomes what are the consequences for those schools? What's the difference between a saliva and the nose COVID test? So nasal and oral swabs have like a Q-tip type thing that they stick up your nose or they stick in your mouth. A saliva test is you spit out into a tube. And that's why I like it, because you're spitting something out, you're not having stuff put into you. How can we push for the emergency order to be terminated? I honestly don't think there is. The legislature would have to stop it, or the governor would have to stop it. And both of those, I don't think will stop it anytime soon. Okay, I work for several community colleges in LA County, some in LA City, some not. Some as an employee and others as an independent contractor, all gig by gig. First, do you have any comments in general about how different hiring relationship, employee or independent contractor? Any comments with regards to a religious exemption when an employee or when an employer independent contractor? One school where I'm an independent contractor and the other school where I actually don't work on campus but from home is requiring the vaccine or a religious or medical exemption, regardless of not being on campus. So it really depends on your employer and what their requirements are. It sounds like you are an independent contractor and you are independently going to these schools and that type of thing. The issue becomes when you are a contractor and you work for a business that hires contractors and then sends you to like hospitals or schools or building sites or whatever. That's where it becomes tricky, because you're contractor, your employer, your actual employer, may not require the vaccine, but the place that you're going into does require the vaccine, and there's really nothing that you can do about that. Is there a reliable source where studies are being collected regarding adverse effects, myocarditis, miscarriages, etc.? So the place that I would go to is called OpenVAERS, Open VAERS, and it is run by somebody who puts together, she goes through the VAERS reporting system, the vaccine adverse events reporting system, and puts together sort of summaries of the data. But I don't know of any studies that are being collected. How can we push the CDC, FDA to review natural immunity? Get the pharmaceutical industry not to donate so much money. I mean, that's the real answer. I don't know if there's a way. So I think it would be through the federal legislature. So your congressmen and senators, if they brought something forward that required that investigation, it may go somewhere, but even then it may not go somewhere. But I think that would be probably the way to do it. Do you have any thoughts on T-detect tests that test for COVID immunity in your T cells? So one thing to remember is that all of these are all under emergency use authorization, similar to all the tests, all the masks, all the vaccinations, other than the Pfizer one, it's all under emergency use authorization. So none of them have been approved by the FDA. I think the T-detect test that tests your T cells is a good thing to test if you don't show to have antibodies, but I think I don't know how valid it is. I think it's probably more valid now than when it first came out because they've done more research with it and they've got more results. Thoughts on the rapid antigen home nasal test? Should we avoid that one as well? I think it has the same applies. For that one, if I were to do that one, I would blow my nose into something that's not a tissue, but something that doesn't have, like, I don't know, maybe parchment paper or something like that, and then rub the swab into that and use that, but I wouldn't stick it up my nose. If a district offers special programs such as a dual immersion instruction, are they obligated to offer the same program online for unvaccinated students? My gut, I have no idea of the answer, honestly, but my gut answer would be no. My gut answer is that's a privilege, so to speak, for you to have. And it's not something that the school would have to offer. Christina, please research the work of Dr. Tom Cowan and Andrew Kaufman. There's plenty of evidence put forth. The contagion myth, I have read it. I have watched a lot of Tom Cowan's videos, but I do a lot of other research. And, I would say to anyone I would say to everyone on here, you have to look at all sides of the story. I mean, I probably read as much, maybe more, on the pro-vaccine side than I do on the other side of things. I read every aspect of everything, and then I come to my own conclusions, and that's what I recommend everyone doing. So do I think that Tom Cowan and Dr. Kaufman have a good idea? I do. Do I think it's fully fleshed out? No, I don't. Do I think that they're and that they believe in terrain theory, and that there aren't viruses out there? There are holes in their research, and if they fill those holes, then I may come closer to leaning in that direction. I'm not convinced that it's fully there, just because of all the other research that I've done. I'd like more information on regarding homeschool pods. What does that entail? Does it allow unvaccinated teachers to be paid and not fall under private or school charter mandates? Yes. So homeschool pods, basically you get together a group of children and you hire a teacher, one or more teachers. I have seen this from just one grade of kids, of 10 kids, maybe 5 kids, maybe even 3 kids, to much bigger scale. So there's one that I know of that has, I think it's middle school. So I think it's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And they have different teachers come in for different groups of them. You basically file a PSA, which is a private school affidavit, which you have to do. Each individual family files one of those, which is what you have to do to homeschool in California. And then, so you each individually do that. And then you need to find a space where you're going to homeschool, and you need to find a tutor, a teacher. And yes, you can, and then the parents pay the tutor directly. So it may be that you pool the money and then pay the teacher, every week, or it may be that you pay them, you pay $5 a week, whatever the amount is, $5, $10, $15, $100, whatever it is, the amount that you pay on an ongoing basis, but you're paying the teacher as a tutor. You're not paying them as a teacher. And so they don't fall under any of the mandates. Do I offer personal belief exemption workshops? I don't, because the school, my belief is the schools that are going to require personal belief exemptions are going to have a form. If you're required to do one right now, I literally would just write a statement saying vaccines are against my personal beliefs, and I do not believe that and I do not wish to have my child vaccinated, or my child is not vaccinated. You can also write a religious exemption and submit that as your personal belief exemption, because religious beliefs come under personal beliefs. All right, last question. What is the best state to move to with the least amount of mandates for kids and adults at school and at work? So I would say the ones that I would consider, and for different reasons. I think the biggest piece here is you need to look at who you are as a family, what your kids want, and what type of place you want to move to. So the place with the least restrictions is Florida, I would say. And Florida goes in the opposite direction of preventing mandates. I would say Florida, the pros of that, the cons are it's hot, humid, and they have a lot of mosquitoes. South Dakota is another one, but South Dakota is small, is a sparse population wise, and it's cold. South Carolina is somewhat humid. It's southern, so there's that sort of culture. Tennessee, I think much of the Idaho, Texas, places like Arizona and Utah are good states because they're purple, but they do fight the vaccine mandates every single year. So I would look for a state so if I were moving somewhere, I would want to go to a state where I am not fighting the vaccine mandates at all, where that's not on my, not on my to-do list. And so I would look for a state where it's not. North Carolina has some mandates. Trying to think. I would not go to the ones that have mandated the vaccine, the general vaccines for children. So I would not go to, it's actually probably easier to say the ones that I wouldn't go to. I wouldn't go to California, Mississippi, West Virginia, Connecticut, New York, Maine. New Hampshire's another one they're very libertarian in New Hampshire. So that one I would consider, but it's cold. Yeah, I wouldn't go to Illinois. That kind of gives you a flavor for them. But I think the key piece is looking at what state, I would look at what states would you consider moving to in the whole of the US, and then kind of narrow it down on that area. And it also may be, like, as I said earlier in this, I had my daughter look into theater programs because she's interested in theater. And so I had her look into, and, what we found was that even though South Carolina has very few mandates, the theater programs do require vaccination. And so it was just interesting to me to see that difference. Okay, we have no more questions, and it's 9:30, so 2.5 hours. So that worked quite well. I will say the one thing people ask me, which I didn't get asked here, but I will say it. People ask, how can we support you? How can we support a Voice for Choice advocacy? We appreciate what you do. My biggest request is that you make a donation to a Voice for Choice advocacy. We have amazing interns that work for us. I don't make any money off of Voice for Choice advocacy. If anything, I put thousands of dollars into a Voice for Choice advocacy. The interns that do a work, they do get paid, and they are amazing. And the more of those that I can get, we are going to be hiring people as well in the next few weeks and months. And so any donations that you want to make would be appreciated. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I will post this recording in the next couple of days. Great. Take care. Good night.